episode 51 of How to Run a Successful Business and Still Have a Life. My name is Stacey Morgan, and today's episode is brought to you by the Simply Business Summit. I'd love you to join me sipping cocktails by the pool at the gorgeous Sea Temple in Palm Cove. If you haven't had a lot of time to yourself, especially in the crazy start of this year, then you want to take these 3 days to book some time for yourself, to invest in yourself, and to get away from the day-to-day, the life, the doing the washing up, the getting the kids to school, all of that. You want to take some time away from that and join us at the Simply Business Summit. You can register now at simplystaceymorgan.com. Well, thank you so much for your great feedback on last week's episode, talking all things motherhood. I thought we would make it part of a 3-part series because, of course, there's always more to say. So last week we talked about connection and building connection with the kids, and how building connection has been a really, really important thing for me in order to kind of knock away that mum guilt that happens to, turn up and tap me on the shoulder and make me think that I'm not doing things well enough. And so today I want to talk about boundaries. And the boundaries that, I've been putting in place in terms of the kids and in terms of the kids and the structure and learning. And I have to start this episode by saying, nothing that I'm sharing when it comes to motherhood stuff, in the same way that, nothing that I'm sharing on the podcast when it comes to business stuff as well is, that you have to do correct, right way, on my way or the highway way to do things. Please know that there is no intention of that ever being part of what I talk about on the podcast. Sharing how I'm doing things and sharing what I'm doing and what's working for me and what's not working for me in business and in my motherhood and in marriage, hopefully for me, not only helps me gain some clarity on what I do and why I do it, but I hope that there are people that are listening that can say, that's hear different perspectives. That's what she's doing. It's completely different to me, and I'm going to stick at that. Or maybe I'm going to try that she, suggested, or perhaps, it's going to give me a perspective to know that I'm not just in the trenches all on my own. I'm not doing this mothering thing on my own. I'm not trying to run a business and nurture my family and spend time with my husband and put the garbage out and all of the things that are our responsibility in this world. I'm hoping that the point of the podcast and of the work that I do as part of the Simply Stacey Morgan brand is to help mums feel like they are not alone, like they've actually got this a whole lot more than they think they've got this. So if you're listening and there are things today that come up in today's episode that you think that's not how I do it, please know that there's no judgment. Everybody has their own way and find their own way to things. And I'm hoping that I can share enough things that I've done wrong as well, because there's a boatload of those, in the hope that you will see as well that, we're all learning. We're all working our way through this in our very own way and finding what works and what doesn't work for us. And it's always a bit of a work in progress. So talking about boundaries today, I wanted to start with what happens to be the kind of the biggest rule in our family, and has been so ever since like the day that Lucinda was born, and that is about bedtime, and that is about that nighttime routine. And the reason we find this one, both Heath and I, we find it calming, we find it liberating, we find it sits really well with our type A personalities. We find, that it gives us a nice sense of control, is that we try wherever possible to get the kids on the 7:00 bus. And Lucinda's a little bit older now, so she's kind of merged through to 8:00, but we try and make the nighttime routine exactly that. We try and make it a routine. So we have, really strong boundaries around what happens at night and what doesn't happen at night and how that nighttime routine works. And it took us a little while to get into that habit ourselves, not just to get the kids into the structure, but to get us into the structure as well. I remember when Lucinda was little, I used to 4:45 would happen and I hadn't thought about dinner yet. And in order to make the nighttime routine work, you've got to be actioning dinner before 4:45. And for adults, and some of you are probably thinking, oh my gosh, what are you, 80? Like, who's eating that early? And so for Heath and I as well, it took a lot for us to kind of get our head around. But it's really, really important that, by the time 4:30 rolls around in our house, I need to have made up my mind of what is going to be happening for dinner and how dinner is going to be actioned, who's going to be actioning it, and how that's going to work. And that was a really big shift for us, that once we started kind of thinking about that nighttime routine starting at 4:30, it changed everything, because it just gave us breathing space. It meant that the nighttime wasn't rushed, that we weren't kind of moving from one activity to another without any breathing room and without any space. So by starting, the dinner process at 4:30, it means that there's time to cook something nutritious. It's not kind of a last minute. And if I'm doing what I should be doing and what I tell myself I should be doing in meal planning at the beginning every week as part of my Sunday reset, then of course those meal planning times, that 4:00 in the afternoon is a lot easier because I know what's coming and I've obviously prepared for it. But let's just say hypothetically, in the case that it's a week where I haven't, like most weeks, then 4:30 is where I'm thinking about getting dinner. If I can get dinner on the table for the kids by 5:30, then we're tracking along. Okay, dinner 5:30, bath 6:00, story is 6:30, and bed by 7 is kind of the way that we roll things. Then Lucinda at that time has a little bit of time with Heath reading Harry Potter, as we talked about in the last episode, and then we go from there through into her bedtime, and that just enables not only the kids to know what's coming, and my kids work really well with that structure and knowing how that works. If we deviate from that, the wheels fall off a little bit, but it also gives Heath and I structure. So we know on certain nights who's doing the put down, who we always allocate. And we'll talk about a little bit in further episodes about one of our favorite books, Fair Play. And we don't just kind of get to the end of the night and we're both in charge of what happens from them. We have an allocated parent who's in charge of the inevitable, Mom, I need a drink. Mom, I need to go to the bathroom. Mom, I need this teddy. Mom, my pillow feels funny. Mom, I need a different blanket. Mom, this blanket's too heavy. Mom, this blanket's too scratchy. Mom, I don't need to go through it. You live it. So we don't both stand at duty like on guard for those moments. If Heath's reading Harry Potter, then I'm on the drink duty. If Heath's going to basketball, then I'm on the drink duty. If I'm saying at 7:00 I'm sitting down to do some work, then Heath's on that duty. And we have that rostered out, just like a work roster, so that we don't end up resenting each other. Because what we found before we rostered it out and before we knew what was going on, we'd both be sitting on the couch or we'd both be in the kitchen, and inevitably somebody would say, Mom, and we'd both do our best to ignore it and to look the other way and to pretend that we didn't hear it. And then whoever gave in first would kind of huff and puff up the hallway to the child in question. And it would just, it just wasn't great. It wasn't healthy for anyone. So that's, that's our biggest boundary in our house in terms of the nighttime routine and getting to people in bed on time, because I find then that gives us time together to connect, Heath and I. It gives us time to make the lunches. It gives us time to set up for tomorrow. It gives us a little bit of time if we want to sit down and watch a show. And we just watched Mayor of Easttown. If you haven't seen Mayor of Easttown and you like good TV, then, I should do a whole episode on a favorite things episode on Mayor of Easttown. But we've just, recently sat down and watched that together on the couch, old school. And that's been really, really great. And so it's that kind of thing that because we allocate it off, because it's really structured, we can make time for those things and that building that connection with each other. And so I encourage you, if you don't have those times for connection, if you don't have those little pockets, those little windows of time in your schedule, then find ways to make that happen, whether that's, divvying up responsibilities or, tag teaming each other in and out of the bedtime routine to make that time, then that's really, really important. In terms of the other boundaries that we set during the day and, to make the house function, it's kind of been a strange time, right? We've been in and out of isolation. We've had, lockdowns in the last 6 months, in the last 12 months, in the last 18 months, ongoing. So it's really it's been easy to fall out of sync of what we do and what we don't do in our family. And that's the line that we say a lot, because we get a lot of pushback from the kids in terms of words that we use and things that we can have and things that we don't have. And screen time is a great example of that. my kids would love to argue with me, but Joey gets to watch YouTube all the time. And we used the line, well, in our family, this is what we do. And in our family, we don't use that word. In our family, we don't hit each other. And so that's kind of the language that we use around that boundary setting in terms of how they fight with each other and what they do get to do and what they don't get to do. And so always, structuring that behavior management around those boundaries and really making it clear from the outset of what is okay and what is not okay in our family has really been helpful in terms of boundary setting for the kids. Brene Brown often talks about parenting being, she gives the image of parenting is leading a child across one of those rickety bridges that's over a gorge, the ones I'm talking about with the panels of wood that kind of fall out from under you. And the handrail are the boundaries that you give your kids. And, that if you don't give the kids the boundaries, then they're kind of out there wobbling on that bridge, trying to figure out what they can and what they can't do. And so with that image in mind, we have certain boundaries around how the kids treat each other and how they speak to each other and, how they fight and when they apologize and what that apology has to consist of, and how much time they are spending in front of the TV and how much time they're spending with each other and how much time they're spending outdoors. And those things will be different for everybody's family, and you'll have your own rules around what you do and what don't do in your family as well. But I encourage you to set those boundaries and to be really clear about those boundaries and to find your own language that works for you and for your family and for your kids, and to use that language and remind them of that language. Because the cutest thing ever is when that language gets repeated back to you. There's nothing cuter than Henry, who's 4, saying, Patrick, we don't say that word in our family. Doesn't sound as great coming out of my mouth, but it's so super cute when he does it. And I like those moments because it means that it's not just Heath and I aren't broken records, just saying the same thing over and over. It does eventually sink in. And it's hopefully these boundaries and these things that we work really hard at that will give them the structure that they need to be able to set themselves up well for the future, so that when they do want to be a little bit more independent and they do want to push the boundaries a little bit more, they can see the benefit of doing things the way that they know and what they get out of that. When it comes to, the bedtime, for example, if they're going to bed on time, then they're going to wake up fresher, and then the day is going to be a little bit easier for them, just little things like that. So we are very verbal about, the boundaries in our house and why certain things are certain ways and what the payoff is and why that's important to us. And I encourage you to be as well, because it just makes things a little bit easier. And hey, isn't that what we want when it comes to the end of the day? So that's my thought on the boundaries that we have in the Morgan family and what works for us and what doesn't work for us. I'd love to hear what works for you and what boundaries you have for your kids and how they've come about, and perhaps what went wrong beforehand to mean that these boundaries have come into play. But it's really important that you find your own special sauce and what works for you. And I would love to hear about your special sauce. I would love you to take a photo of this episode if you're listening on your phone and tag me in your Insta story when you post it, and let me know what's working for you and what's not working for you. Or just send me a DM on Instagram. I'm at Simply Stacey Morgan. I would love to connect with you and find out what works and what doesn't work in your family. And I do appreciate you taking the time to sit back in your car or on your walk or while you're waiting to pick up the kids from school or activities, listening to the podcast. I hope that you've left me a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you enjoy it. And even if you don't, I'd still love to hear your feedback, because the more that we get people reviewing and rating, especially on Apple Podcasts, it helps share the podcast with more people. So I would love your help in making that happen. But I do so appreciate you taking the time to listen, and especially when it comes to episodes like this, where perhaps we all feel a little bit self-conscious about what happens behind closed doors, the way in which we parent our kids, and it doesn't often come on show. So I appreciate your lovely feedback and you getting in touch with me. And as I said, you can reach out to me anytime. I'm at Simply Stacey Morgan on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and I'll talk to you next week.